Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Jeff Haverdink, and I serve here at Calvin as the Director of Calvin's Alumni Engagement. Welcome, glad you're all here this morning, and hope you enjoyed a nice breakfast and some conversation at the tables. Excited to welcome you today to our next installment of the Executive Breakfast Series. And this is an event that is co-sponsored by the Calvin Alumni Association and the Calvin University School of Business. Our goal with these series is to feature timely and interesting discussions around issues that intersect Calvin alum and members of our regional business community. So we're excited to bring both groups together and just have some good conversation. We're going to continue on touching on our theme of the future of everything. We've recently covered speeches and topics such as the future of driving, the future of music, future of water, and the future of poverty with experts and specialists in each of those areas. If you're interested in hearing one of those lectures again, or if you haven't heard them the first time, they are all archived on the Calvin Alumni website. So you're welcome to go back to our website and catch up on any of those talks that you haven't heard already. But today, we are here and excited to learn more about the future of business. I'm excited to introduce my colleague, Dr. Jim Ludema, who is our brand new Dean of the School of Business here at Calvin University. Jim is a graduate of 1982 here at Calvin, and it's great to have him back on campus here on staff with us all. Jim is an experienced administrator, researcher, and educator, and came to us from Benedictine University in Chicago. Jim has an extensive network in the business world and has done a lot of consulting with Fortune 500 companies such as McDonald's, John Deere, Allstate, Merck, and many others. I'll let Jim share more of his story as he comes up here to talk to us, but I think you're going to understand why he's a great person to talk to us today about the future of business. Following Jim's talk, we're going to have a moderated Q&A here, so if you've got questions, that's fantastic. We look forward to answering them. Bob Ames, who is our director of the Calvin Center for Innovation in Business, will be our moderator for that question and answer, so we look forward to that. So, without further ado, please help me welcome Dr. Jim Ludema.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Good morning.
Thank you for coming this morning. It's great to see you here. I noticed that it was dark when we arrived, and it's still dark, which means winter is on its way. But thanks for getting up early and coming in for this event. I'm looking forward to talking to you about the future of business because I believe this is an exciting topic in the sense that we're about to enter a period of unprecedented change that's going to have a dramatic impact on every sector of society, and particularly on business and business education. This particular moment has been called a lot of things, like the fourth industrial revolution or the virtual age. But I like the language used by Guy Perlmutter in his book, Present Future. He calls it the deep tech revolution, because this moment is influenced by 10 exponential technologies that are beginning to converge, and in the next 10 years will redefine reality as we know it. The 10 exponential technologies are these: quantum computing, artificial intelligence, networks, sensors, robotics, virtual reality, 3D printing, blockchain, nanotechnology, and biotechnology. And these technologies will present all kinds of business opportunities, but they'll also raise all kinds of theological, philosophical, scientific, technical, and ethical challenges. So much so that when I think about the rapid, life-changing effects of these technologies, I kind of feel like this guy, and you may too. It blows my mind what might be coming down the road. But that's also why I'm very excited to be talking with you about it, because as Christians, we need to be on the forefront of developing and applying these technologies and influencing the way that they get used. We've got a great opportunity to work together from every discipline, particularly from business, to innovate and build pathways forward that embrace these technologies in a way that honor God and honor God's will for us and for the world that He created. Before I get into the 10 technologies, I just want to call attention to two additional books that have influenced my thinking, along with Perlmutter's book. And these are The Future is Faster Than You Think by Peter Diamandis and Stephen Kotler, and Full Spectrum Thinking by the futurist Bob Johansen. Diamandis and Kotler call these emerging digital technologies exponential technologies, because once they became digitized, the rate of their development accelerated exponentially. So who here can tell me what Moore's law is? Anyone? Moore's law. Yeah.
It's just the principle that computing power continues to multiply.
Yep.
There's a certain value.
He says the principle that computer power continues to multiply, and that's exactly it. So, in 1965, Intel founder Gordon Moore noticed that the number of transistors on an integrated circuit had been doubling every 18 months, which meant that every year and a half computers got twice as powerful, but their cost stayed the same or went down. And that's why the smartphone that you have in your pocket is 1,000 times smaller, 1,000 times cheaper, and literally 1,000,000 times more powerful than a supercomputer from the 1970s. And it's not just computers. Now that artificial intelligence, networks, sensors, and so on are all digital, they too have jumped on the back of Moore's law and are getting twice as powerful and cheaper every 18 months. Not only that, but they're converging with one another, and they are accelerating each other's rate of acceleration in an exponential way. And they're creating all kinds of disruptive innovations that are sure to wash away not only existing products, services, and markets, but also the social, economic, and political structures that support them. Think of the example of the electronic autonomous vehicle that Jeff Stout talked about in this very same executive breakfast 2 years ago in 2019. Jeff is a Calvin alum and is the Executive Director of Research, Technology, and New Mobility at Yanfeng Automotive Interiors. He explained that hundreds of companies around the world are sinking billions of dollars into developing electronic autonomous vehicles. Already, there are thousands of them on the road. And within 5 to 10 years, he says, these may be the only kind of vehicles that we use. This means, in terms of impact on the social, economic, and political structures, no more individual car ownership, no more individual car insurance, no more taxi drivers, maybe no more major car brands, because the high-tech companies will run all the fleets. No more gas stations, no more emissions. You can sleep in your car, eat in your car, work in your car, and of course there will be needs for new laws, new regulations, and new societal patterns. By the way, all of the photos in the presentation are either from a photo stock that we're willing to or able to use, or I will mention the source that I got them from. And this one I took from TechCrunch.com, and it is a Volvo 360C concept car. And I'm just wondering, wouldn't you like to have one of those and cruise around in one of those to the grocery store or wherever else you have to go? I think that looks pretty sweet. So then, let's take a look quickly at the 10 technologies. The first is quantum computing. In classical computing, a bit is a tiny chunk of binary information that's either a 1 or a 0. A qubit, a quantum bit, is a newer version of this idea. Only unlike binary bits, which are either-or scenarios, 1s or 0s, qubits utilize what's called superposition, which allows them to be in multiple states at once. It's kind of like a spinning coin. In classical computing, you either have heads or tails, 1s or 0s, but in quantum computing, it's like the spinning coin where both sides are rapidly flashing by at once, and that gives you incredible power. Just as an example, a 50-qubit computer has 16 petabytes of memory, which is a lot of memory. If it were an iPod, it could hold 50 million songs. But if you add just 30 more qubits to that computer, something else entirely comes about. Diamandis and Kotler say this in their book. If you had an 80-qubit computer, if all the atoms of the universe were capable of storing 1 bit of information, an 80-qubit computer would have more information storage capacity than all the atoms in the universe. Think about that. That's absolutely astounding in terms of its computing power and storage capacity. Now, I know that there are a lot of hurdles when it comes to refining the technology of quantum computing and making it cost-effective. But lots of high-tech firms, universities, and governments are working on making it happen, and many experts say we're only 5 years away from using quantum computing power on a regular basis and vastly increasing our computing speed and capacity for data storage. Then there's artificial intelligence. Already, artificial intelligence can look, listen, read, write, integrate knowledge, and learn. And in many cases, it can do it faster and better than human beings. For example, artificial intelligence can pick you out of a crowd, read your lips at a distance, and even know what you're feeling by examining your micro expressions and other biomarkers. And I'm sure you've heard how the Chinese government uses AI to spy on its citizens, and how the Israeli intelligence uses it in high-density urban areas like Old Jerusalem to identify potential terror threats. But there are many other uses of AI. Hospitals use it to predict sudden death or from respiratory or cardiac failure. The Department of Defense uses it to spot signs of depression and PTSD in soldiers. And you can use artificial intelligence now as a relational coach or as your financial advisor. And more applications are right around the corner. And then there are networks. Networks move goods and services, and more importantly, information and innovation from point A to point B. And of course, the internet is the world's largest network. Currently, about 4 billion people have access to the internet, about half the world's population. But in 2019, Amazon launched a project to put up over 3,000 low-orbit satellites, and SpaceX launched a project to put up over 12,000 low-orbit satellites to provide high-speed broadband around the world. And then Boeing and a company called SAS jumped in the game and started an initiative to put up a set of multi-terabyte medium orbital satellites. And I got this photo from the SES website. And the network is called the Empower Network, and it's designed to bring connectivity to anyone around the world. And the neat thing about the medium orbital satellites, that's different from the low orbital satellites, is that you only need 6 of them to blanket the entire Earth. Whereas with the low orbit satellites, you need thousands of them. Now, no matter which technology wins the day, or when that happens, it is anticipated that before 2025, anyone who wants to be connected to the internet will be connected. And imagine the explosion of ideas, interactions, innovations, and new products that come when 4 billion more people join the internet. It's mind-boggling. Then there are sensors. And sensors are electronic devices that measure something and then send that information to other devices on the network. Things like thermostats, pressure gauges, equipment monitors, cameras, microphones, GPS, heart rate monitors, you name it. It's estimated that there are currently 50 billion connected devices in the world, most of them with multiple sensors. For example, the smartphone you have in your pocket probably has about 20 to 30 or more sensors in it. This means that we're currently living in a trillion sensor world. And of course, we call this the Internet of Things, and it's only going to grow. Stanford researchers estimate that by 2030, there will be 500 billion connected devices, which will translate into a $14.2 billion sector of the economy. And these sensors just keep getting smaller and lighter and cheaper. Soon sensors will be able to migrate inside your body in the form of smart dust that can float through your bloodstream and collect and transmit data about every aspect of your health. Think about that for a minute. And that's just a few years down the road. Next technology are robots. And they are entering nearly every aspect of our lives. In operating rooms, robots are assisting with hernia repair and heart bypass surgery. On the farm, robo-harvesters gather crops and pick fruits from trees. In construction, there are now commercially available robo-masons that can lay 1,000 bricks an hour. Isn't that amazing? And factories everywhere, and Philip and others who work in supply chain management will attest to this. Factories everywhere are moving more and more aggressively to automation because robots are cheaper, smarter, and easier to program than ever. And they never get tired, they never go to the bathroom, and they never take vacations. And so automation is just exploding in factories everywhere. And of course, drones are robots too. They are now planting trees with drones, like this one made by Drone Seed Corporation, that fire seed pod bullets into the ground, allowing a drone to plant as many as 100,000 trees a day to reforest deforested areas. And of course, the flying car will not be far behind. Already the technology exists. And just this year, Cadillac unveiled its new prototype that I found on a website called dronelife.com, and many other companies are following suit. The Jetsons may be just around the corner for all of us. Then there's virtual and augmented reality. In 1989, a virtual reality system cost $250,000. And the computer that powered it was about the size of a refrigerator. Now we have standalone headsets like the one you see in the photo with exceptional resolution. And they can be coupled with microphones that give you 360-degree audio. They can be coupled with haptic gloves, vests, or full body suits like the one you see on the screen that include scent emitters, taste simulators, and every kind of sensor imaginable, including brainwave readers that can give you a fully immersive experience. that scientists say can give you a richer emotional experience than reality itself. Right? That's a little freaky. I mean, imagine putting on one of these, this is called a Tesla suit because it's made by, who else? Tesla. And imagine putting on a Tesla suit and doing some virtual skydiving and having a richer emotional experience than you would if you actually jumped out of a plane. It's hard to imagine, but again, it's just around the corner. And I got this slide from a website, interestingengineering.com. Then there's 3D printing. In the 1980s, the original 3D printers cost tens of thousands of dollars. Today, you can get one for $350 like this one our granddaughter Della got for her 9th birthday. It can print in plastic, wood, and carbon fiber. And she's having a blast with it. But the more sophisticated machines can print with metal, rubber, plastic, glass, concrete, and even organic materials such as cells, leather, and chocolate. And it is anticipated that 3D printed organs will hit the market by 2023. That's 2 years away. The impact of 3D printing on the construction industry is particularly impressive. Two companies, Mighty Buildings and Icon, are using 3D printing to build houses that are 3 times cheaper than the industry standard. This photo and the next 3 are from Icon's website because Icon is partnering with NASA to build prototype dwellings for the moon and for Mars. And if you go to the Icon website, you will see that they are looking for volunteers to go live in those prototypes once they put them on the moon and Mars. So you may want to check it out. Next is blockchain, and it's been called the sexiest accounting solution in history, in the history of the world, and the end of government as we know it, because it allows people to establish a validated digital ID that follows them around the internet and then enables them to engage directly in transactions with other validated IDs and thereby cut out the need for middlemen such as banks or election commissions. Blockchain can also validate assets, for example, to ensure that your engagement ring is not a blood diamond. It can follow the history of a product. And it can also validate contracts, for example, making sure that the house you're about to buy is in fact legitimately owned by the seller without needing to use a realtor or anyone else, a lawyer. All of these features are causing major financial firms like JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and the Bank of America to invest in cryptocurrency strategies at scale. And crypto is expected to grow into a $200 billion sector by 2025 and a $3 trillion sector by 2030. Again, mind-boggling. Next is material science and nanotechnology. And I don't know how many of you know this, but in 2011, the US government launched the Materials Genome Initiative, a nationwide effort to double the pace of innovation in material science, and it worked. Scientists were able to map tens of thousands of materials that we do understand, and then begin to predict properties and create new materials that don't yet exist. And working with nanotechnology, we are now able to construct just about anything, such as nano additives to fabrics to help them resist wrinkling and staining, and nanomaterials that make everything lighter. Automobiles, airplanes, baseball bats, power tools, you name it. And they're even able now to make a smart augmented reality contact lens with resolution 6 times greater than today's smartphones. This is Mojo Vision's lens, which they rolled out just this year in 2021. and I got this photo from their website. The lens can access information from the internet. That little contact lens can access information from the internet and project text and videos and images into your field of vision. So you can see turn-by-turn directions as you walk, or I could even see notes right there in front of me while I'm giving a talk like this and not have to look down at my printed notes or the computer on the podium. Again, mind-boggling. And the last one is perhaps the most impressive and also uncertain, and that is biotechnology. As you probably know, your body has about 30 to 40 trillion cells in it, which determine your health. And each of those cells has about 3.2 billion markers from your mom and 3.2 billion markers from your dad. And that's your DNA, your genome, and it determines your hair color, your eye color, your height, a significant chunk of your personality, your propensity to disease, and your lifespan, and so on. The Human Genome Project, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, which cost about $100 million, made it possible to read these markers in your cells and begin to understand what they do. So now you can sequence your genome in just a few days at a cost of less than $1,000. And in a few years, you'll be able to do it in an hour for about $100. Think of that, being able to understand your own genome in about an hour for $100. What this means is that we're moving rapidly closer to individually customized medicine, or what they call N-of-1 medicine, in which every treatment you receive has been specifically designed just for you and your genome. You'll know the foods, supplements, and exercise regimen that are perfect for you. You'll know the diseases that you're most likely to develop and be able to take steps to prevent them. And many of the diseases that plagued earlier generations and our own generation will fade from memory. And many scientists say that as a result, the next generation may live to be 200 years old or older. Think of that. Again, mind-boggling. So what does this mean for us as Christians in business? Oops. To be sure, there's a little bit of that. I know I feel that way when I read this stuff and I think about what does that mean for me as a business educator? What does that mean for the School of Business at Calvin University? And of course, what does that mean for all of you as business leaders? But as I said at the beginning of the presentation, it means that we all need to be working together to be on the forefront of developing and applying these exponential technologies and influencing how they get used. And as we do this, I think it's important to be guided again by our fundamental principles. First, in the words of the contemporary testimony of the Christian Reformed Church, our world belongs to God, and this invites us to rejoice in the goodness of God, to renounce the works of darkness, and to dedicate ourselves to holy living and in joyful obedience, offer our hearts and lives to do God's work in the world. That's what we're about as we approach these technologies. They're on their way, so let's get out in front of it, let's be on the forefront of it, and let's do it to the glory of God. Secondly, our job, of course, is to glorify God by serving as stewards or trustees or caretakers of God's great creation. And all of these technologies and products and services we create from the beginning belong to God and God alone. And our job is to care for them and engage with them virtuously, lovingly, and with mercy and justice the way God cares for and engages with us. And third, because we're made in the image of God, Our work must reflect the characteristics of God. God is relational, so the work we do must flow out of the relationships we have with the community around us, and they must flow back to support, enrich, and benefit those same communities. And of course, God is good, so our work too must aim for outcomes that are good. It must aim for virtue, substance, meaning, and excellence in everything we do. So in conclusion, let's join together and recognize that our world belongs to God, that we are stewards and caretakers of God's great abundance, and that as people made in the image of God, we are called to serve our community and to use these exponential technologies to innovate and to create products and services that honor God and promote flourishing for God's great creation. Thank you.
Right. Well, that's a lot to think about over breakfast. Anybody have any questions for Dr. Ludema? All right.
The cost in '89, what's the cost today?
Of
Whatever you mentioned, I forgot. What?
I think the 89 was the 3D printers at $250,000, and I put up the example of my granddaughter Della, who bought it for $350. Now, obviously, it's not a super sophisticated 3D printer, but the cost has gone down dramatically. I don't know, Philip, maybe you know more about that, being in supply chain management and operations, but
I mean, they're all different. So many of you probably work with 3D printers as well. You can buy them still up to $250,000. That's basically speed and some of those sorts of things, but it's a big challenge. The other thing that I'll say, though, is people have been talking about 3D printing replacing traditional manufacturing methods for at least 15 years, and that's kind of when I started working in that field. So it's coming, but you know, there's a lot of work still to get there, and there's a lot of opportunity for us to help shape that.
you bet, I would agree. And I think that that's a really important message too, Philip, that all of these technologies exist and they're doing stuff today. All of them are going to continue to develop, and they're going to develop exponentially. And so this will come. Whether it'll be next year, whether it'll be in 2025, whether it'll be in 2030, that we don't know. Because, you know, there's always promises that don't get kept or technologies that don't work out. But it is definitely on its way, which is why I believe we need to be in the middle of it and shaping it.
Other questions? Dale.
So I ask myself, can the human spirit endure such rapid change? Let me give you an example. I had a friend who was pretty high up in a computer company, and he had 21,000 people working for him. He was at the leading edge of this thing. This is a number of years ago, at the leading edge of all this kind of stuff. But boy, when it came to the church, he wasn't willing to change anything. And I said to him, help me to understand this. He said, look, for 6 days a week, I got all this stuff swirling about me. Everything is changing. I need something, he said, that's stable in life, and that's the church. And he said, I don't want to change anything in it. Well, I'm wondering.
Yeah, that's a great question. And that is, I would say, a central question to all of this. Because these technologies are coming so rapidly, number one, and because they have such a fundamental impact on who we are as human beings, how we understand the universe, how we understand God, and so on. And that's a big question that I have as well. Think about for a minute the notion that augmented reality already can give you an emotional experience that is more vivid than real life. I mean, I can only imagine that it'll be very quick, very soon, that those of us in higher education will be wanting to use virtual reality in a big way. And that's going to create monumental shift in higher education. We may not even need many institutions of higher education anymore because people can access it from the internet and can use virtual reality suits to gain that learning, and they can do that in interaction with other people in virtual reality suits as avatars and be in, quote, relationship with them in that context. Now, you and I both know that that is not the same human experience as being face-to-face. That's not the same. For me, it's not the way God created it and wanted it. And yet, this is what's coming. And so, how do we deal with that? And can we deal with that kind of change? And can we, as Christians, be at the forefront of it to shape it and shape our own institutions in a way that marry the best of both worlds, so to speak? It's a great question. The other one that is on my mind a lot about this is biotechnology. And that's the thing that I think is the most remarkable. I mean, the capacity to get in there and edit genes and to get into your DNA sequence and to, head off diseases or change your bodily constitution to be able to do one thing or another. Is that what God intended for us to do? Manipulate the human body in that way? The technology is coming, and I think that's why a fine Christian man, was the head of the Human Genome Project. Why am I blanking? Francis Collins, and just won the Templeton Prize for that work. Because, again, we as Christians need to be at the forefront of that because it is, in a sense, messing with the very foundations of what we know and what we believe to be true about God and about the nature of reality. Yeah. That is kind of a heavy topic for a breakfast meeting, isn't it, Bob? You're right about that. Yeah.
Well, I was thinking about a similar question too. It's especially when you start talking about creating experiences that are better than reality, and that not only brings up kind of deep theological questions, but those moral and ethical questions that as business leaders we've got to wrestle with.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And by the way, just on that, and absolutely, we'll take on the next question. I'm optimistic about this, because we as Christians have been doing this. We did it through the first industrial revolution, the second industrial revolution, the third industrial revolution. We just have to be thinking creatively about how we use these technologies, who are the winners and the losers, how they get applied, and what is God honoring. Yeah. And it'll be the same in this one, although it'll be faster and it will be of more magnitude, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah. From our own experience, I've had early experience in AI and supply chain and expert systems. Every one of these technologies, without exception, will bring moral issues. Yeah. Facebook, I mean, people say, isn't that great? And yet our families are struggling with our families using those darn technologies. So I'm not sure who is going to decide. Do we wait till we have an issue, whatever, or do we hit it ahead of time? But every one of them brings a moral issue. Being able to decide what our child's going to be. Oh, I want a basketball player who's 6'8", and his IQ of Y. I mean, those are tough moral issues.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and of course they're already here. I mean, we've got deep fake videos that circulate around the internet. You've all read about how Facebook and Instagram, the impact that they can have on youth and, the self-esteem, the self-image, and so on of youth and others. All of those things exist. And also, the designer gene issue that you're talking about. And, that's exactly why I wish that a Reformed Christian business leader ran Facebook. I wish that a Reformed Christian business leader ran the tech companies that are doing the work with designer genes. And I know that there are many Reformed Christians and other Christians in those organizations working, and I think that that is a real benefit and what we need to be doing. Yeah.
My question is addressing more of the growing issue of mental health and some of these technologies like the virtual reality. I can see that as a potential problem with those that are struggling to be in, the reality of what God has us in now, that could be, a possible danger for those that already struggle with mental health to, want to live in an alternate reality that's not real, maybe to cope with mental health issues.
Yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. My wife Beverly is a clinical psychologist, and she deals with that already. And the thing that she has really impressed upon me is the more we live in a digital world, the more we starve our real relational connections with the people we love most, and the more we lose sight of our purpose. I think that that's a really important thing to think about, because what happens is we become sort of unconsciously dependent on the technologies. And so, another way of saying that, we always have our nose in the phone, or our smartphone, or in our computer, or, for many people, actually, gaming or doing gaming with virtual reality. And we spend so much time in those worlds, those virtual worlds, that it takes away, it impoverishes the relationships we have with the people we love most, and it takes away our continuous reflection on what is our purpose, why are we here, what should we be doing. And those two things create ennui. They create a certain disconnection and dissatisfaction with life that can have a very profound impact on mental health. And at the same time, these technologies can provide resources for mental health. And so, again, it's it's two sides of the same coin, I think, in many cases. I don't know, do you have other thoughts about that what we need to be doing or how we need to be thinking about that?
It's just something I was pondering, because as we make strides in technology, we're thinking about the good that it can do, for our communities and society, but there's always someone that would take something and use it for evil.
Yeah.
Use it to manipulate others.
You bet. You bet. Yeah, and we talk about this a lot at Calvin University too, because a lot of universities now are coming up with these e-game teams, right? And so, and do we do that at Calvin University? Well, it takes, sometimes those players on those e-game teams will be doing their e-game, 20 hours a day, or even 24 or 48 without stopping and not sleeping and not eating and not getting out and getting exercise, not interacting with other people in the real world. Is that something we want to promote? And yet we want our students to be very versatile with technology, and we want them to be at the forefront of those fields. How do we manage that? So yeah, it's a great point.
Other questions?
Maybe bringing this closer to home, all those companies are driven by profit, right? They're chasing each other to make profit. What ways can Calvin University and the new business school coach their students? The finance ones want to get to Wall Street or whatever. How do we coach them to have that profit not be the driver, the only driver?
That's a great question.
And maybe this is part of the same question. Francis Collins is such a great example. Do we know of people like him that are emerging that we can reach out to and start to make them be the role models that come and speak to our students?
Yeah, absolutely. And we know so many great Christian business persons, and we do bring them regularly into our classes, into the university to speak, and so on and so forth. I mean, just yesterday we were meeting with one who's in the insurance industry. We all right? Okay. So yeah, I was just saying that. Are you good, brother? All right, great. Just yesterday, we were meeting with someone who's in the insurance industry, and this whole thing about, I can't remember what it was called, but people doing insurance without using insurance companies. The way blockchain makes possible. That's going on. And yet, he had a very compelling case for why that's going to be harmful to people. And he comes from a strong, well, he's a graduate of Calvin University, went through the business school, business and econ school. And he said, we just have to keep focused on the notion that the insurance industry is a very purpose-driven industry. We exist for a reason to help people eliminate risk. And we have to keep our focus on that it's a noble purpose that we provide to the world. And we can't make it just about our profits. It has to be about protection. And I think that is really the key in what we are teaching in the Calvin School of Business, and we have to continue to teach. That first and foremost, business is like any other social institution instituted by God. Its purpose is to serve God first and foremost, and second, to serve the communities and the earth in which we live. And we have to put that first. And then we have to say, okay, what are the virtues that fall out of that way of thinking? Let's run our businesses that way. And the profits then become a byproduct of doing business well. And I think that is the message that we send in the Calvin University School of Business, and the one we have to keep sending, and what makes Christian business schools and Christian business leaders different than many other folks.
Other questions? We're chewing into the deep questions this morning. This is fun, isn't it? Yeah.
I'm curious, how many people here have an electric car already? 1, 2, 3, 4. How do you like it? I got 2 thumbs up over here. You like it? Yeah.
We had an interesting comment in our meeting yesterday with the president of this insurance company, who was speaking about that rate of change, which is always quoted and sometimes is provocative and maybe a little scary. Like when Jeff Stout said 2 years ago, in 5 to 10 years, these will be the only kinds of cars you could buy. Well, the check that we got from our insurance executive yesterday was the average age of the car on the road is 15 years. So if you kind of do the math, the rate of change may not happen quite that quickly.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't be feared quite as much or anticipated quite at that level. But when you think about that rate of change, and that was one of your opening comments of how all these trends are working together to really create this unprecedented kind of rate of change that we're getting into. I keep thinking about Dale's comment or his quote from his friend. What can we as business leaders and as Christians do to sort of slow the game down for ourselves? Do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, they talk about athletes slowing the game down so they can really concentrate and focus on doing things well and right. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's really good research on this in the literature around strategic leadership of organizations. And the basic message there is what business leaders need to do is they need to think more about the long-term future. And also, of course, run the business in the day-to-day. And what typically happens with any business leader is that the press of the present, the press of the analysts on Wall Street, the press of having to turn a profit this quarter, the press of reputation issues and risk issues that blow up at any given moment, all of those kinds of things. Currently, the supply chain issues, the inability to get labor, all kinds of issues that they face on a day-to-day basis, those take up most of the time and the attention and the energy, even of senior leaders. The research shows that most senior leaders are not very good at doing the longer-term visioning and beginning to create scenarios of possibility depending on how things turn out. And so the short answer to your question is Spend more time thinking about the future while you're also keeping an eye on running the business today.
Great, thank you. Other questions? While you're thinking of them, I'm going to ask a follow-up, if that's okay. In your experience, because I know you've done this as a consultant, what are some of the best ways for leaders and actually for anybody to kind of start visioning that future? What kinds of things can we tap into to really help us kind of create a vision for a positive future?
Yeah. You know that I do a lot of work with organizations using a process called Appreciative Inquiry. And I am a big proponent of this process called Appreciative Inquiry because I've been doing organizational change work with major corporations at very large scale for many years, and it is the process that I see producing the best results. And the basic principle behind Appreciative Inquiry is to, number one, include multiple stakeholders in any kind of visioning process. You know, typically when we do this visioning or strategic thinking or thinking about the future, we do it with a small group of senior executives at the very top. But we all know that that never works. And it never works because then anything they decide has to be filtered down layer by layer into the organization. And in that translation process, it gets lost and it doesn't get implemented. And people can't connect their own job to the vision that the senior leaders lay out. So number one is to make it a very inclusive process and include people from top to bottom of the organization, a diagonal slice every function in the organization in the visioning process. Then the second thing is to begin by looking at strengths, almost counterintuitively, you know, and asking the question, when we're at our best currently, what does that look like? What are the systems, the processes, the people, the relationships, the ways of working that we use to function at our very best? And then to say, okay, to leverage that, let's look to the future. What does that look like? What are the scenarios we're seeing? And it's always good in that step to bring in some content experts. You know, especially if you're thinking about some of these technologies, to bring in some people who know about these technologies. You probably have them on staff in your own organization. If not, you can bring them in from the outside. To say, how can we stand on our strengths and what we do when we're at our very best, our values, our systems and processes and so on, to build that future. So that's what I would say. It doesn't have to be appreciative inquiry per se, but sort of three pieces. Include as many stakeholders as you can because there's so much more knowledge out in that community when you bring the crowd together, bring the group together rather than a small group. Focus on understanding strengths, combining strengths, leveraging strengths to think about where you want to go in the future and then, you know, design strategies to get there. Yeah.
Thank you. We've got time for one last question. And if you don't have one, I'm going to just ask Jim, how do you feel about the future of business education at Calvin, especially in light of this kind of structure that's emerging out of the ground here next door?
Yeah. That building is really cool, isn't it? I mean, it's cool in many ways. Number one, it was made possible by a very generous donation by a Calvin alumnus and his wife. And so that really excites me, that there's that kind of vision, that there's that kind of support, that there's that kind of investment in Calvin from our alums. And so the building is cool in that way. The other one is it's just a neat looking building, and it's got really neat classrooms, you know, some flexible classrooms, some seminar style, you know, tiered classrooms for lectures, beautiful spaces for students to just hang out and study and congregate, lots of windows, lots of light, and it sits right there on the East Belt Line and will have tremendous visibility when people are going up and down that road. So that's kind of cool. And the third thing about the construction of the building is that they're on target for getting it done by late spring, early summer. And, given all of the supply chain issues in the world right now, that's a miracle that we're actually going to be moving into it. So, the building is great. But then in terms of the Calvin University School of Business, speaking of starting by looking at strengths and then looking to the future, what really attracted me to this position in the Calvin School of Business is, again, the support of the business community, the support of the senior administration, and the quality, and you're going to like this, Bob, because you're one of them, the quality of the faculty in the School of Business. And we have a number of them here: Philip Johnson, Scott Rush, who else? Just the three of you maybe. I mean, we've got really high quality faculty. And I don't know if many of you know the history of the School of Business at Calvin, but it used to be a Calvin business econ department. And the economists kind of ruled the day and weren't always all that favorable towards business. About 12, 15 years ago, the two departments became independent departments. And since then, you folks have built a number of great programs, a number of great majors. We just launched 2 new master's programs, a Master of Accounting and an MBA, an online MBA that people can take from anywhere in the world. Next year, we're going to be starting a brand new major in Operations and Supply Chain Management, which Bloomberg Business just said is the new hot degree in all business schools, for obvious reasons, because we all see those container ships sitting out in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of California, among many other reasons. But the point being is that the faculty is an exceptional faculty and has really built a lot of programs because they were listening to the business community, finding out what the business community needed and needs, and building programs to address that. So that was cool, and I said, those are the kind of people I want to work with, and so we're going to continue that going forward. Our top priorities are to continue to connect with the business community, to understand their needs and build programs to meet those needs. We're planning to get the School of Business accredited. I don't know if that means anything to most of you, but when there is an accreditation for business schools called AACSB accreditation, and it's the gold standard in accreditation. And we're going to explore going after that because that allows you to compete with the big boys. It allows you to attract top talent and students and continue to create a strong reputation for the institution. And then also the endowment, the same endowment that came with, that's funding the building, has money in there for scholarship. And Bob, you run the Calvin Center for Innovation in Business, and you have an endowment that can also be applied to scholarship, because we need to be, as Reformed Christian business educators, again, on the forefront of doing research about what it means to run Christian businesses that do honor God and do the kinds of things that we're talking about in the world that we're currently living in. So that was a very long answer, but I'm excited about the support of the business community, the administration, the great faculty, and the potential to continue to grow and create new programs that meet the needs of our community and the business leaders.
Thank you. Well, I hope you see why those of us that are close to the business school at Calvin are so excited about Jim and his leadership. And let's give him a round of applause to thank him again this morning.